Good morning and welcome back to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. I see a few new folks today, but and some people who just could not get up by 9 a.m. And so wishing them all well as they are catching a little extra sleep, and gold stars to each of you for coming out on this beautiful morning to be here for the second day of our symposium. Welcome to our friends who are participating via the Zoom. We're so glad to have you here as well. Jason and Christina in the back have the baskets with the pencils and the cards. So if you think you might have questions in this coming session, and you didn't get a card, raise your hand and they can bring it to you. Everybody set? Okay. That's great. And there are goodies in there, so if you need to pop up and grab yourself another cup of coffee or some other goodies, please do. Again, we know it's 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning, so fill yourself up with the caffeine that you need. But I believe the conversations like yesterday are going to be stimulating and fascinating and keep all of us wide awake and engaged. The lunch break today also, just so you know, is on your own. But that means please come back also. Maybe find a new friend that you can go to lunch with and come back for the afternoon session. Well, yesterday in our first session, talking about archives, architectural archives and house museums, there was conversation about accessions, how you create the scope and grow your collections. Roger was prodigious, as David Brownlee mentioned, that, you know, by the time he retired, there was by now there are 300,000 drawings and 350,000 photos or whatever, plus all of the realtors' guides, the buyer guides, the trade catalogs, the photo, all the different things that we have, probably at least 1 million items, and we continue to grow. We have an active collections committee, which is led by Christina Wilson, our curator, and Jeff Cohen, who is professor at Swarthmore. It's early for me. Bryn Mawr, sorry. I misread his lips. It's early for me too, believe me. I took a crew out for dinner and then got home at about 11 o'clock last night and turned around to get here early. So pardon any mistakes I make. At Bryn Mawr, and on our board and leads the collections committee, is a wonderful partner to have in this process. That collections committee actively, in fact, we have a few other collections committee people here, David Brownlee, Justin Detweiler, anybody else I'm missing from the collections committee. Thank you, Emily Cooperman. I missed your head right there. Emily Cooperman, also some of the top architectural historians and collectors in the city are on this committee to help us really make sure that we are collecting around our scope and not missing wonderful opportunities. Well, today I'm delighted you may have noticed coming in the front door something that looks like the library company's painting by Peter Cooper of from the early 18th century of the Philadelphia landscape. I wonder why we have that here. About 50 years ago, Roger started conversations with then treasurer John Archer, whose family had owned the other copy of this painting for many generations and had retrieved it or obtained it from another family private collection, which had it for probably about 100 years. And John wasn't sure he wanted to keep it in his household because of its value and felt it belonged somewhere else. And he and Roger began this conversation about it. Roger gave John his time, figured John would do it in his own time, and then John unfortunately died at an early age. The painting went to his son Pierce, who briefly also served on the board. And we were very sad to lose Pierce earlier this year. But on his death, his wife Cindy reached out to us and said, I've been looking through the papers and found that this painting was meant to go to the Athenaeum. Is it possible? Would you be interested in it? The interesting thing is, Jack Archer had originally thought about selling it and giving the proceeds to the Athenaeum to help it with its accessions and acquisitions and conservation care, and that didn't happen, and we would much rather have the painting than the money. Christine and I said yes and crossed our fingers, and we took it to Jeff and the committee, and they said yes. And over the last few months of conversations with Cindy, we've been able to bring it in and finalize that this week. It is now hanging there. And we like to think of it as Roger's final accession. 50 years in the making. This painting, The Southeast Prospect of the City of Philadelphia by Peter Cooper, one of only 2 paintings believed to be done by Peter Cooper. Not much is known by him. We think it purports to be from various assessments of it to be from the 18th century, but we will find out more soon, we hope. It is like the library companies, noted by Martin Snyder in his book City of Independence. It portrays the Philadelphia waterfront in its earliest recorded form. The painting donated to us by the Archer family is believed to also be by Peter Cooper, same time period, and the only other copy of this painting. Now, bringing this painting into our collection allows us, in a very concrete way, to ground our architectural collections in the earliest representation of Philadelphia's built environment. We're currently in conversation with the library company to be able to bring the 2 paintings side by side for the first time for scholars to study them for a deeper understanding of their connections and their similarities and differences, to get a better understanding of their provenance and perhaps when each one was truly painted and completed. We'll be raising funds for its conservation. It was last conserved in the 1950s, and we look forward to doing future conservation, including removing the varnish that is on it to see what colors come up from underneath the varnish, and creating a permanent exhibit of the painting that will be in conversation with other items from our collections that illuminate the story of our city's architecture as told from this painting. So on behalf of our board and our staff, the members of the Athenaeum, as well as the many people who will benefit from access to this painting for generations to come, thank you to Cindy, to John Archer, who is also here today, Pierce's brother, and your family for your careful stewardship of this jewel and your decision to bring it to its new home. Thank you. So now I know at the break you all will be crowding down in our entry hall to see this painting, and it will be up there for a few more days, and then we'll take it down for a little bit before it goes. It'll go over my office door, which is at the foot of the stairwell, so that will keep elbows and hands off of it, and maybe a little longer for that exit, everything else to come up. But we're going to be working on this charrette for the scholars for some time in the first 6 months, hopefully, of the new year, and be able to publicize and share out what we learned from it. So thank you so much. Well, I'm delighted to move from this, how apt, into our first panel of the day, the Athenaeums Architectural Collections, because while we've talked about architectural collections and archives in general, it is our collections that Roger created. And we want to know more about them. We always want to know more about them. We want you to know more about them. The Athenaeums Architectural Collections, building a foundational legacy for learning and preservation. Now, the moderator of this panel is Emily Cooperman, member of our collections committee. She is also, I understand, probably the person, one of the people, top 5 people who understand how to use the Philadelphia Architects and Builders site. Her colleagues look to her to say, how do I find something? How do I do something? So she really understands our online digital collections as well. Emily is a senior architectural historian with PS&S and is an architectural and landscape historian and historic preservation consultant in practice for over 35 years. She currently chairs the Historic Designation Committee of the Philadelphia Historical Commission. While in the Historic Preservation program at Penn, she was taught by Roger Moss in his foundational documentational course, which led to the publication of her monograph on the early landscape artist William Russell Birch, picturing the American scene. And I'd like to invite Emily up here to give her introduction about Roger and the collections. And after that, she will invite the rest of the panel up and let everybody introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Beth, and good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all here. It's wonderful to be here and have the opportunity to talk about Roger and the collections and all that has been done and I hope will be done in the future with them. Our subject this morning is the architectural collections of the Athenaeum, as you've just heard, and the fundamental and crucial role that Roger Moss played in creating them. Just as important, if not more so, is the way that Roger used these collections and how his work with them, and I would add archival collections around the region, fostered and continues to aid and enable scholarship, information, and historic preservation. And you're seeing some of the results of those efforts on the screen. I'm going to use my experiences with Roger as a student and as a scholar and preservationist who benefited from Roger's work to illustrate these points, so to speak, because Roger's work connected to collections has profoundly influenced so many aspects of not just my own education, scholarship, and practice, but those of so many others. And I was fortunate to have been connected to Roger's teaching and work in all of these. I recently lectured to the class on historic documentation that's been mentioned a few times at Penn, just last week, in fact, the required course for first-year graduate students in historic preservation there that was mentioned by Rob Sarnio and David Brownlee yesterday, and then again this morning by Beth. This was the course in which I first came in contact with Roger. For those of you who are not graduates of the program, let me characterize that class as history boot camp for preservation students, which, as David said yesterday, many of the first-year students, like me, had barely ever done any historical research and knew little or nothing about the essential components of establishing a property's history and the techniques of the field in investigating that. The core task in this course was researching and writing about the history of a demolished building in Philadelphia, including establishing a chain of title for the property from the present back to the earliest known date, and addressing the property's eligibility for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. I can't say that I did particularly well with the latter. And it's somewhat ironic that writing designation analyses and nominations became one of the core parts of my practice, given my somewhat shaky start. Let's just say that Roger introduced me to it. One of the crucial components of the class was where we might go to conduct the research required. I was recalling for the class that I recently lectured to my terror at having to confront deed research in City Hall in the old days, before digitization, when you had to make your way through a maze of an arcane parallel system that the city had invented in the 19th century on microfiche, before finally getting to the city archives and handling the real deed books, only to be confronted by the obscure and peculiar language of historic deeds, which we'd never looked at before. And here I want to tip my metaphoric hat to Jefferson Moak, formerly of the City Archives, for rescuing more than one preservation student in understanding what the parts of a historic deed meant. Roger's attitude was one that clearly communicated that he assumed we would all manage somehow, and in fact we did. I only learned later that this was something like combat training for dealing with overworked and sometimes, it must be said, uncivil civil servants in municipal and county offices throughout the country, an essential task in historic preservation property research. I also learned much later that indeed, deed research can in fact be a very difficult task. And I was right to be afraid of it. Once you had survived the experience of completing a chain of title in Philadelphia for Roger's class, you were prepared to research almost anything, anywhere. I think one of the most important aspects of this class, which Rob registered yesterday, was that this was not an empty academic exercise, as what I said I hope will suggest. The papers we produced in that class and those who came before and after my cohort are all in this building. Thanks to Roger, and I hope they continue to help other researchers in understanding the city's architectural and social legacy, and I hope we'll talk about that when we are all gathered up on the podium. For me, one of the crucial components of this course was Roger's personal introduction to the city's research libraries and archival repositories. He took us around personally to all of them and introduced us to the keepers of the keys, so to speak, which established really important connections for all of us. And these, of course, included the collections here. We understood from Roger's attitude how important they were, not out of some kind of vanity on his part for having acquired them for the Athenaeum, and Bruce will speak further about this, but because they were vital to understanding where we live and what it means. Roger's deep connections to an understanding of the extraordinary richness of information in these institutions was something I clearly absorbed, even if I did not entirely understand or appreciate it fully at the time. I remember distinctly his distress at the state of 18th century wills and inventories in the city archives because of the potential loss of information this represented in understanding the city's history. Like the lessons learned from deed research, it was only much later in conducting research in other places around the country that I came to understand just how remarkable are Philadelphia's research repositories. In parallel, of course, with the extraordinary character of our built environment and social history. In addition to the truly remarkable compiling of important architectural collections that Roger brought here, providing fundamental documentation of the built environment and building technology of the region and beyond, it is equally important to emphasize that he did not simply sit on this material and admire his acquisitional acumen. As David Brownlee reviewed and Gail Winkler discussed yesterday, he sponsored, edited, and authored a remarkable group of publications and was connected to many others in various ways that use the collections and beyond to disseminate information about historic houses, historic architectural paint, historic sacred places, and others, including the project on which I was extremely fortunate to have worked with Lee Carson Shirk on William Russell Birch, which rose out of my Penn dissertation for which David Brownlee was my advisor. Roger diplomatically put me, Lee, and her brother-in-law Glenn Curry together to work on the project, and it made possible a friendship with Lee that I cherish to this day. I am forever grateful for his making that book happen. In the same vein, it is thanks to Roger that we have Charlie Peterson's work on Robert Smith in print, because he put Charlie together with Constance Greif and Mariah Thompson in order to make that happen. There is certainly more that can be said in this vein, but I want to shift slightly to another collaboration that led to another kind of project that has had far-reaching implications. The groundbreaking biographical dictionary of Philadelphia architects, written with the late Sandra Tatman, was one of the key sources we were introduced to in Roger's documentation course as first-year preservation graduate students. And I certainly used it in connection with the work that I did on the John Hare Powell house that formerly stood at the northeast corner of 19th and Walnut Street, which was the house that I ended up with for the project. The dictionary was followed 25 years ago by the inception of the Philadelphia Architects and Buildings Project, a groundbreaking web-based source of authoritative information on the built environment of the region. PAB, which was created in partnership with the Architectural Archives of the University of Pennsylvania, which was where I was for that part of the project, was built from the collections not just of the Athenaeum, which are represented here, and in the database that David mentioned yesterday, but from the archival repositories throughout the Philadelphia area. And Roger, working with the late Julia Moore Converse, obtained the funding for and built the staff and equipment infrastructure to create this remarkable project that still lives on. Although digital projects have grown and flourished in the years since the initial PAB work, as far as I know, There is no comparable project anywhere else in this country in terms of the sheer breadth of truly remarkable information, truly reliable information on the built environment, which including extraordinarily high-quality digital images. This is because of the primary sources that are at the heart of the project, thanks in no small part to Roger's insistence on that. PAB was followed by philogeohistory.org, as David mentioned yesterday, which continues to provide digital access to historic maps, atlases, and historic aerial photographs to a greater extent than any one single source of which I am aware. And again, the content represents regional collections, not just the Athenaeums. In conclusion, before I hand things over to my colleagues, I will say that Roger left us an extraordinary legacy, not just in the collections here at the Athenaeum, but in using them in novel and exacting ways to understand what is around us and to act on that understanding. Okay, with that, I will invite my colleagues to come up. Okay, good. I think what we'll do is we'll go that way.
Okay.
And I will ask each member of the panel to introduce themselves and say a few words about themselves and their connection to Roger and discuss collections.
Sure.
So I'm going to start logically with the man on my left, your right, Bruce Laverty.
Thank you, Emily. My name's Bruce Laverty. I began working here at the Athenaeum in November of 1983. Roger's 40-year career and my own 40-year career crossed for a quarter century. I won't make you stand up again since it's Saturday morning and it was a rough night, no doubt. But just by a show of hands, how many people here were Roger's students? Okay, thank you. Me too. But the difference is, I didn't have to pay the University of Pennsylvania a dime in tuition. And the other advantage is I didn't know that the course was going to last for 25 years. I saw a lot of you when you were sweating it out, trying to do that documentation, because when he would bring his students to introduce the collections here, I was the person that brought out the collections, and he would describe how wonderful they were. Many of you were excellent students and have gone to be excellent practitioners in architecture and preservation and in teaching on your own part. A few, not a few of you, but a few of the students were not quite as careful as they might have been, or as Roger would have liked it to be. Class would start in September with a paper due in late November, early December. And it was not uncommon for me to get a phone call, usually the Monday after Thanksgiving, saying, I was there in early October. Could you tell me what I looked at? I didn't write it down. So that produced a variety of grades on the papers that reside here at the Athenaeum. But I remember Roger saying that even a bad paper is good to keep because somebody can look at the bibliography and begin to think about where to start. So that was one of the lessons that Roger taught me, that even look at something that we know is a poor example as a start and as a lesson as to what to avoid. So I had originally outlined 10 things that Roger taught me over our quarter century here. I'm not going to go through the Decalogue today, but I will share a couple of pieces with you. Number one is always be prepared to answer the question, you work at the what? So staff members of the Athenaeum recognize this problem, so that when you meet somebody casually and they ask you where you work, the Athenaeum. The what? Well, what is that? I had a double dose of problems with that because, well, it's an architectural library. Are you an architect? No. I'm an archivist. What's an archivist? And so there was a lot of explaining to do, and where does Athens come into it? And so it could have easily been a 2 or 3 hour conversation. So if I met people casually and they would say, where do you work? I would say, Center City. 95% of the time, that ended the questioning. So I realized that not everybody needed the full, full Athenaeum
explanation.
story.
Yes.
So there was almost a catechism that Roger had established for the Athenaeum. What is the Athenaeum? The Athenaeum was founded in 1814 as a subscription library and is housed in an 1847 National Historic Landmark building with internationally significant collections of architectural drawings, photographs, and books relative to architecture, interior design, and decorative arts. End of and in that one, rather compound sentence, you could tell what the Athenaeum was. There were a couple of key words in there. One, the key words, National Historic Landmark. Roger never mentioned this building in conversation or in writing for the first time without identifying it as National Historic Landmark Building. He actually wrote the National Historic Landmark designation for that. That was incredibly important because you could spend hours trying to tell people what an Athenaeum was, but people who had never heard of a National Historic Landmark could figure out, hey, that's an important building. Right. They might not understand what that means, but hey, it's a National Historic Landmark. So he always used those words when describing the Athenaeum. So talking about collections. Roger was terrific at soliciting collections, but also responding to those who offered collections. And he had an excellent working relationship with George Vaux, the president of our board from 1966 to 1996. And I had been at the Athenaeum 2 years. I was hired on a 2-year grant to do the 2 lower books there. That's the G.K. Hall catalog of our architectural drawing collection. Just as that project was wrapping up, Sandra Tapman, who had been the architectural librarian here, left to pursue her PhD at Delaware, and so I moved into her position. So in early 1986, I was the new architectural librarian, architectural archivist here. And so George Vaux called Roger and said, why don't you come on out to the house? I have some things to show you. And so the 2 of us went out there. Roger drove. And I had been to the main line, but I'd never been to a person's house, a residence on the main line. I had a certain idea of what it might look like Dahlebran or something like that. So we drove out Montgomery Avenue, up Caversham Lane, and when we drove up to the house, I thought, this is a post-war suburban house. It was large and well-proportioned and leafy. But I thought, okay, and I knew that his family had gone fairly well back. So we were escorted directly into the basement, what as a kid I would have called a recreation room. I'm sure that it was designed that way, but had become a den in the library. And those of you who knew Mr. Vaux knew that he had a very distinct way of speaking and had a gravelly voice. And so, gracious host that he was, he said to Roger and me, would you like something to drink? And so I said, water? Don't have any water. Orange juice? No orange juice. And so as I'm reciting these things, George is pouring a glass of scotch for himself. This is at 9:30 a.m. And pouring a glass of scotch for Roger. And then I said, no, I don't think so. And I thought, is this a test, for me? Am I being tested? And so Mr. Vaux ended up. I finally relented, and I said, well, how about a beer? And so he reached over to his
Breakfast with
mantelpiece and he grabbed a pewter tankard,
Yeah.
which I'm sure was from the 18th century.
Probably.
And poured a warm bottle of Budweiser or whatever was on the shelf into it. And as the head raised in the tanker, the years of dust and cat fur sort of came out over the top of the tankard, and I thought, well, I have to at least put my lips, or at least look like I'm putting my lip on it. So it was an eye opener for me in terms of dealing with people. But he started to show us around some things. He said, take a look around. He says, I want to sort of empty some things out here. And he had us looking at books. And he pulled this one sheet of paper out of a box, and he said, here, what do you think of this? And it was a little pencil sketch, very faintly written. And on the backside, it had an inscription, and it said, sketched by Joseph Sansom of the room where the Declaration of Independence was signed. And so one of Mr. Vaux's ancestors, a man by the name of Joseph Sansom, had just seen John Trumbull's painting of the signing of the Declaration. Apparently, the painting was like a rock star tour, went all over the country. People paid a quarter to see it. And so Sansom saw it here in the 18-teens, about 1818, and he sketched out, and he sent a letter to Trumbull saying, you got the paneling wrong on the east wall of the signing chamber. I was there in 1776. I know what it looked like, and he did this sketch. And so Mr. Vaux says, would you like this? And Roger turned to me, and for the first time in my career here, he said, what do you think, Bruce? And I said, absolutely. And as it turns out, we heard that it was Mr. Vaux who showed that same sheet of paper to Charlie Peterson at a lunch at the Union League in 1964 when the National Park Service was restoring the chamber. Penny Batchelor told me herself that was the single most important piece of paper in the restoration of Independence Hall, and it had been sitting in Mr. Vaux's break front for at least 100 years. And so that reminded me, or at least illuminated in my mind, that there are treasures out there, and there are families that maintain those treasures. And so that was just the beginning, and that's where we'll leave it there.
We've just heard an example of the same.
So.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, before we move on to Jeff, I was reminded of, when I was at the Architectural Archives, Bill Whitaker, who was here yesterday, and I went to an architect's house he had just retired from practice, and we were taking his archive, and his archive was in the attic that was completely full of coal dust. And so we emerged completely covered in coal dust from this exercise, and I felt like it was coming out of my hair for days afterwards. But yeah, it's not necessarily clean work. this archives business. Okay, with that, I'll pass on to Jeff. Could you say a few words about yourself and go on from there?
I was going to say, welcome to the Carbacine.
Yeah.
My name is Jeffrey Cohen. I teach in the Growth and Structure of Cities department at Bryn Mawr College. And I'm an architectural historian mainly, but since I got to that department at Bryn Mawr, can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Since I got to that department, the situation of buildings in the urban context has become much more a part of the way I conceive of buildings. I could listen to Bruce for hours, but our assignment was just to introduce ourselves.
No, you're allowed to keep talking.
Okay.
And if you don't go on for an hour, I won't stop you.
No. What is it that the lawyers say when they're not quite done with the witness? I'd love the opportunity to redirect.
Right.
Yes, right, exactly.
But I'll just say a couple of things for now, and it'll come around again, I think.
Yeah.
How many of you have ever opened that top red book, the big red book?
The Biographical Dictionary.
It's good to see it. It's the Sandra Tatman and Roger Moss, the Biographical Dictionary of Philadelphia Architects, 1700 to
1930.
1700 to 1930. Yeah.
And if you look at it, you would probably see that it's got I don't know how many hundred biographies, a few, probably
Over 900.
over
I was
900.
gonna
It's
say,
906
it's more than 100.
pages, I believe you said it was. And it's all lists of buildings in Courier fonts beside the biography. It's both a remarkable piece of compilation, incredible detail in there, but there's only about a nanosecond between the time you're delighted with it and the time you think, where are the pictures, where is the evidence for these things? It almost was a provocation to do the rest of the stuff, and that became the Philadelphia Architect and Buildings Project, which we'll talk about some more. But that's mostly what I wanted to talk about when it comes back around, is its backstory and its future story. And I'll leave it at that for now and turn to Sam.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. My name is Sam Olshin. I am an architect, practicing architect at Atkin Olshin Shade Architects, and I don't know whether I'm strategically located here, but I grew up in an Oscar Stonerov house that I can see out this very window. 1967, my parents bought that house. And I think really almost from that age, that early age, when I walked to Friends Select in the mornings, appreciating the urban environment has been very, very important to me, and just a passionate love of Philadelphia. I'm on the House and Historic Structures Committee at Carpenter's Hall, which is where I most interacted with Roger and really got a profound appreciation also for that building, the care of that building, the necessity of taking care of older buildings. And next year's 40 years I've been at AOS Architects, which was said yesterday that most people don't stick around that long in any one place, and sometimes I'm not so sure why I have either. But the slides that were just on the screen that we're rotating through, Bruce very wonderfully helped me put those together, because every one of those buildings is a building that AOS has worked on, even in the last couple of years. The Metropolitan 3,000-seat concert hall by Broad and Poplar, which has really brought back from the kind of death knell of the Academy of Music, Masonic Temple, the Wiley Church that's now Broad Street Ministry, Broad Street Love, and it gives me a kind of great joy to be able to feel that I contributed to the city and making it a better place to live. And it's a testament to how our firm has evolved over the years in taking care of older buildings, which as an architecture student at Penn, where we were very siloed, the architecture students didn't really hang out with the preservation people or hang out with the landscape group, and I think Penn has evolved in a much better collaborative way, and I think we have all learned to respect older buildings in a way that I'm not necessarily taught to do that in the beginning, but to be able to have the Athenaeum as a great resource. Every one of these photographs and the drawings and the PAB website would be impossible to do the kind of effort that we have done for those buildings without having the PAB website and knowing where to turn for drawings and material lists as a wonderful resource.
Thank you. I think to start us off, I'm going to ask a kind of naughty question, the way my husband would put it. And it's sort of like asking a parent, who's your favorite child? If you had to pick one collection here that particularly sort of sticks in your mind as one that is particularly meaningful to you, which one would that be? Naughty question.
No, it's not a naughty question at all. It would have to be the Walter collection, the Thomas Ustick Walter collection, and not just because of the incredible architectural drawings that are in it, and there are, but because of his letters and his diaries, and to be able to see what was in the architect's mind and in his heart during the good times, and even better during the bad, at least better, for curious readers. There was one diary entry that I remember very much from 1842. So this was in the middle of the Great Depression caused by the Panic of 1837, and the Bank of the United States had just closed, and work at Girard College had ceased because there was money running out there too. And so Walter Walter said that he had $15 in the bank. He had just had to sell his house, which he had designed at 13th and Arch Street. And I think what really broke his heart was he had to sell his architectural library. There was a little notation that he made. He was a devout Baptist, as was his family. And it said, spent $3 to send my family, which included his wife and sisters and 9 of their children, spent $3 to send my family on a church picnic. And then underneath that said, don't much like paying for other people's fun. And that really, and then he put a coda to that.
When he wasn't having any at the budget.
He did it, he put a coda to that, said, especially when wealth has taken wings.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah.
The Walter Collection is really one of the most complete collections of a long-lived architect that one will ever find. Diaries, 2 elevations and 1 section, $5, $5, and $10. Mm-hmm. Daily, yearly, we have these. He was an incredibly scrupulous record keeper, and he was in practice from the 1820s until his death in the 1880s. So downstairs we have just, I think several different books could be based on T.U. Walter, different portions of his life, but it's frustrated anybody's attempt to take it all in one research project. One of the things that I find most interesting is seeing an architect thinking through a problem. So I'm going to look at one collection that I think is not nearly as big, but one in which I saw something really remarkable. This is the collection of James Peacock Sims. James Sims lived from 1849 to 1882. And he trained a young architect named Wilson Eyre, E-Y-R-E, Jane's fictional brother, or fictional Jane's brother. He was in the office when a very young, in his 30s, James Sims had a heart attack and died in the office, and Eyre picked up the practice. And it was in the process of designing a new house for George Vaux, a different number than the 10th.
Listen, Fran.
And he was designing a house that initially was the kind of house that's presented its narrow face to the front, and then you walked down and entered in the side. And after a while, he was thinking through this. After Sims died, the Vaux family turned to Addison Hutton to finish the building, but it had already been started. And Eyre started to get an idea, and he called it a design for a long and narrow house. And that building that became one of the keystones of Vincent Scully's fantastic dissertation from 1949, I think it was, at Yale, it became a book called The Shingle Style. And in it, he looked at Eyre's house called the Anglecott, which was built in Chestnut Hill, which he dated completely wrongly. He dated to circa 1880, when Eyre was like 22 and hadn't really started going yet in 1880. But the evolution of that design, from the design for Vaux in Bryn Mawr to the design for this house called the Anglecott in Chestnut Hill, that in his first year of practice he produced, you could see the evolution of the building and the harmony of the front that he started to develop. And for me, that kind of being able to see successive drawings for a single thing and the thinking that's going on behind them, that was one of the most exciting things. But I have to say that if they gave frequent flyer miles for the times I've been through both the Big Red Book and the database, I would be traveling right now. I'm waiting in a waiting room to get on an airplane.
I guess from the practicing architect side, I love coming here to look at the hand drawings. And there was a lot said yesterday about the switch from drawing archives to digital archives. And I'm of that age where things are rapidly moving in that direction. And it was mentioned yesterday about Jamie Coker at Ventori Scott Brown had started to do the first 3D massing so that Bob Ventori could sketch over that. And that's definitely the way our office has moved as well. The drawings that are downstairs now in the gallery, and I hope everybody sees it as you come in, are such a fantastic collection of drawings. And for a time sometimes when you need to feel inspired as a practicing architect. You need to go in and see something like that to remember why you decided to do this at all, which is pretty wonderful. Jeff and I both teach at Bryn Mawr College. He's on the theory and history side, and I actually teach the next generation of students Introduction to Architectural Design. And after years of teaching hand drafting and hand sketching, we relented 2 or 3 years ago and are now teach SketchUp as well. So the students are learning now to draw on the computer, and I feel it's somewhat of a blessing and a curse, because if you skip that step of using your eye and walking around and looking at something and jump to the computer, I think you miss something. But I feel we do a disservice to our students without starting to give them kind of marketable skills. And I think trying to blend those two together, and seeing that show downstairs, I really want to bring the students through that. The one thing I'll specifically say about hand drawing, and for somebody of my age, we're working at a fantastic boarding school up in Connecticut now. We're doing our 5th project for them. And I do hand drawings and watercolors for them. And the head of school once said, don't show us any more photorealistic renderings. We don't want that. And I said, well, we're capable of doing it. We invested all this money in computers. We have all this digital capability. Isn't this what your development office wants? And she said, no, we know you can do that, but that's not what we want. We want your hand drawings. So I said, why is that? And she said, one, we want to know that we hired the most creative person that we could find out there that has the technical skills and the creativity. And also, when the people that we go out and solicit for money see digital renderings, they feel it's all done, that they don't have a chance to engage or put any comment on it. If they see a hand watercolor sketch, very much like these wonderful ones downstairs, they know it's a creative process that's not done, and they can make comment on it. And I have taken that to heart, and it's probably one of the best feedback that we ever got. And to have the Athenaeum as a repository of all those wonderful drawings that were no doubt Wilson, Eyre, others showed those drawings to clients to get their feedback. I'm glad the legacy continues, and I want to make sure that it continues that way.
But maybe we should continue in the vein of teaching. What ways do you think you would hope that the collections might be used in the future for teaching that may be the same or different from the way they've been used in the past, the way you've used them in classes?
If I could just give a shout out again to Roger. Both Roger and Gail taught, and I worked with their students over decades. But Roger also gave me the first opportunity to teach, where he recommended me for a position at Rutgers University at Camden, where I was teaching archival management in their night school. And then I taught an introduction to historic preservation there. That was about the year 2000. And then 10 years later, Mr. Paul Hirschhorn here, that's how he gets the front seat, invited me to teach at Drexel, where I've been for the last 15 years. To be able to bring my students, in both cases, to the Athenaeum to see original materials is really the highlight of their courses. People expect digital images on their desktops, and it's great that they have, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, at their fingertips. But it's not the same as seeing the original. And Bill Whitaker, would agree with this, and does a fantastic job of assembling demonstrations. I had a Drexel class here in 2 years ago, and one of the students, I had pulled out one of the real estate atlases for Powelton Village, in the Drexel area. As I was trying to show them what Drexel had wiped out, But one of the students says, Race Street, 3400 block, that's my house. And he said, can I touch it? And I said, you can touch it. And I said, you can carefully turn the page if you want. And he almost burst into tears. And he said, this is from 1910. And it shows my house, and we have a porch like that. And so, I'm very proud, and Roger was very supportive of the geohistory, the establishment of the Geohistory Project in 2005. People who are not interested in history, people who are not interested in architecture, I have never found a person who's not interested in what their house looked like. When it was, there are a lot of people who are not interested in genealogy of their own, and probably for good reason, but no,
It's their choice.
but nobody is not interested in what their house looked like or what their street
their
looked like
neighborhood was.
before their house was there, and to be able to supply that, and it's also very rewarding for me as a member of the Designation Committee at the Historical Commission to see how important that and PAB are to every single nomination that comes before.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Comes before the commission. Someone once said they had mentioned in the nomination that the building that in question was listed on the Philadelphia Architects and Buildings Project, and an opposing view, a lawyer said, well, that's no great designation because there are hundreds of thousands of buildings mentioned in there. And I said, well, that's like the phone book, that's like saying somebody is worthless because their name happens to appear in a telephone directory.
Yeah, really, exactly.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you both answer the question, but I do want to circle back to PAB and digitization versus physical collections, and because it's something that is, it's so easy, because I do this all the time, is the pajama research that I sit at my desk, and there's so many things that one can now learn without leaving one's desk, that between the digitization of 19th century American publications and newspapers that Mike Lewis mentioned yesterday, and now full text search in familysearch.org, for example, which is mind-boggling. And I think we can stray into AI if we want to, but I don't have a lot to say myself personally. But I think I want to let Sam and Jeff talk about students and using collections. And maybe, Jeff, you want to stray into the digital, talking about your students and how that relates to PAB and other digitization projects of your own.
Sure. I think there's nothing quite as exciting for an undergraduate, and I mostly teach undergraduates at Bryn Mawr, as the notion that you can find new knowledge. And an awful lot of the seeds for creating new knowledge and the tools for creating new knowledge have been made available through all the things that succeeded the Big Red Book. So in the old days, you may have been taught there was, you may have some indication that there was a building at 34th and Race, was it, or something like that? And in order to look at the property history of 34th and Race, you would probably have to go to 4 or 5 different locations to see an atlas, a historical atlas, what they call a real estate atlas, that will show the footprint of every building on every block in Philadelphia.
And that's what we did in Roger's class.
The 1884 one is over here,
Right,
but the 1894 one is in that place over there.
Right.
So these things are now available through the Philadelphia Geohistory site. What year did that start? Do you know?
2005.
2005.
Yikes.
An incredible tool for looking at the evolution of places. In some cases, the really detailed maps of the parts of the city date back as early as 1858. The footprint of every single building on every block in the city of Philadelphia, in the developed part of the city of Philadelphia. By the time you get to about 1880, every inch of Philadelphia is recorded in these things.
And it turns out that Philadelphia was a crucial center of publication of these atlases for the entire country. It wasn't, sorry to interrupt, Jeff.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
please. But if you were interested in Germantown, Mount Airy, and Chestnut Hill, you could see the 1889 atlas with every footprint, and then you could look at the 1899 atlas with every footprint. And we're getting more because the Philadelphia Water Department, through the agency of Adam Levine, has been allowing us to scan more of these things. They were kept at a a sewage treatment plant in southwest Philadelphia somewhere, but when you digitize them, the smell doesn't come with them.
Thank goodness. Optional. Right, it's optional. Smell-o-vision.
Other things like before there were phone books, all around you in this room, there were things called city directories. And you'd look them up alphabetically by people, and they'd say what their name was, what their occupation was, and where they lived. And if they were the owner,
And their color.
in the older ones,
Many times,
in
yes.
the older ones,
Yes.
it was indicate race. But these things would also give, for businesses, the names of the proprietors of the businesses, and then the location of the businesses. And as you can imagine, it's a very intense amount of information. But a lot of these things have now, through Ancestry is probably the easiest way, and many campuses like Bryn Mawr have a site license to Ancestry, which means they can go in, and we were looking the other day for a building that was the residence of Joseph S. Malone. This isn't a happy story, but the student was very eager to say, okay, we'll look up Joseph S. Malone because he was mentioned in the Peerless Brick Company's advertisements of buildings done.
Right, yeah.
This was an incredible list from 1890 that had a list of buildings that this company that specialized in colorful and machine-made brick put out with buildings using Peerless and their architects and their location. To run those to ground was what I invited the students to take on as a project, and in some cases it ended in frustration, much unbeknownst to me because I hadn't done the research in advance of their projects. So we looked for Joseph S. Malone. There are a lot of Joseph S. Malones, as you might imagine, but none of them lived in the right place. And so we couldn't figure that one out. But in many cases, you know, if Joseph S. Malone had a daughter who got married to somebody else, he might have built the house for them, and then their name, unless you do the genealogical work, is not going to come right to the surface. But triangulating between these kind of resources, between the maps, the directories, the drawings.
Census data.
Yep.
What was the last?
Census.
Census data, which is also available through Ancestry. I love to teach students how to use these tools. And I even look to them in a kind of hope for the future that they will come help us do this project, because that's really a question that I want to get to later, is the future of the the PAB. But I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah.
I
We'll
think
come back.
for teaching, I think we're all a product of the way we were taught ourselves and what we bring to it. I was fortunate enough to have Paul Hirschhorn taught me drawing, and David Brownlee taught me appreciation for architectural history, and I got to go to India as a graduate student and studied Lutyens' work, the Viceroy Palace elsewhere, and just to see how stylistically architecture could change based on climate, and that was wonderful. Teaching at Bryn Mawr for the last 35 years is, I mean, I have spectacular students, Bryn Mawr and Haverford, but it has always struck me why students raised in the suburbs choose to go to school in the suburbs to study urban issues. So the kind of growth and structure of cities department, which is a fantastic place to teach, we challenge the students to come downtown to really kind of learn about what is it that makes a city great, and honestly what they ultimately in their careers can do to make sure that the city stays great. And I think Jeff and I are going to be teaching a course in the Philadelphia Row House, and we have been teaching in the studio side Row House for quite some time, and give the students a site at 20th and Fitzwater, which is a vacant site, and make it easy on them because it's a corner site, so rather than an infill site. But they have always in the past come to the row house that I lived in for 35 years in Queen Village, which is right in the middle of the block. And I'd love for students just to see in their face a realization that a house can get light from all sorts of different places, be it a skylight, windows in the front and the back, the way the rooms are laid out, the openness of the partitions, how privacy and public space can be modulated in very, very creative ways in spaces that can be 14 or 15 feet wide. And I find that a kind of a thrill to be able to impart upon them that urban life is pretty wonderful that way, and that they can appreciate it. So hopefully they'll end up settling in the city and doing some changes before they decamp back for the suburbs.
If I could come back to the row house for a second.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff,
Because,
please.
obviously the most dominant building type in the city of Philadelphia is the row house. And in a lot of ways, the PAB and the Biographical Dictionary of Philadelphia Architects don't really address row houses so much unless we know who the architects are. But I think it's an important growth direction for this, and especially with the availability of all the maps where we can see development in process of row houses, not necessarily by named architects. And the whole set of questions that architectural historians are asking are not always the ones that align in terms of biography, especially biographies of architects. I think in some day, actually I just got a note this morning that this is the week anniversary of Frank Furness's birth in 1839. And Furness in some ways is he's one of the reasons we're here today. This is going to be a little bit sinuous, but in the study of Victorian architecture, there's a great enthusiasm in the 1970s for the authorial persona of designers, and Frank Furness is the epitome of that. People have basked in Furness and Willis Hale's idiosyncrasies and their personal voyage in design, and it really very much fits architects who worked between the 1870s and the 1890s. It's not as good a tool for more recent architects after 1900, or even the ones before, where they're not shooting so much for the individuality and expression of their persona, but more casting their client in whatever imagery of class and situation that pleases their client. Row houses especially beg different kinds of analysis, and perhaps a narrative that isn't so much based on birth, training, work, and death. It's really the patterns that you find. Sometimes the patterns are in plan. There are enormous resources that number in the tens of thousands of examples, if not hundreds of thousands of examples, of plans that were made by fire insurance surveyors. And I'm not talking about Sanborn maps. I'm talking about John Smith buys a house, and the house is worth 3 times his yearly salary. And if that house burns down, he is out of luck. And so most people, and especially people who had a mortgage, because mortgage companies like you to have fire insurance too, the fire insurance companies, and there were more than a dozen of them in the 19th century, they would send out a surveyor to draw a plan, often with the different rooms inside, especially one specific company that was really consistent, maybe 85% of their surveys, and there may be over 50,000 of them, all between 1820s and 1890s, at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. It's dangerous to do anything that involves that many examples of anything. But we've got about 28,000 of them in a database, not an illustrated database, but this is an incredible potential resource for seeing more common buildings, everyday row houses, of which there may be over 200,000 in Philadelphia, in telling their story as well, and expanding beyond only a biographical lens on the architecture of the past. Sorry, did I kill the continuity?
No, you didn't. I'm thinking about, right, what I was thinking about is how we've been working on trying to continue the work of PAB and how that might connect with that. And one of the things that I will explain about PAB for those of you who aren't intimately familiar with it, which I suspect is most of you, I suspect many of you have looked at it and used it, but one of the fundamental principles of PAB is that the way it was built was from primary documentation, so that it started out with individual records from the collections here, from the collections of the Architectural Archives, and one of the background motivations, certainly for I don't know so much about here, but for Architectural Archives, was to have the resources to really inventory a lot of collections that had not been fully inventoried, and to be able to have a funded means of doing this, and to get the staff to make it possible. So that PAB is built from that, and from, as the biographical dictionary, a lot of the information that's in it on projects was created by, from note cards that Sandra Tapman created by going through the Philadelphia Real Estate Record and Builder's Guide. And another thing we should probably talk about is the BG digitization, but that's, the idea was to build PAB from reliable sources of information that were as much as possible primary or scholarly secondary sources, so that there is a lot of information that's still in PAB that hasn't made it up to being a project. And so there's things that are floating around in there because the primary goal was to write architects' biographies and builders, and sorry, I'm sort of riffing in my own mind, that other ways to go would be to talk about developers and builders and add those things to PAB, which is thing we've talked a little bit about in the past.
Emily, could you say a little bit more about the PR, ER, and BG for
Yes.
folks who have not read it?
The Philadelphia Real Estate Record and Builder's Guide was a trade periodical. It was published weekly between 1886 and 1941, or was it 44? 40. 1940. In Philadelphia, there was actually also a preceding version in New York City, which I guess, was that the same company? I don't even, it was the same company.
Just Real Estate Record and Builder's Guide.
Yeah, and the Athenaeums copy of that was courtesy of George Thomas, who rescued the copy that the Free Library was throwing out, literally. So George went dumpster diving and collected them, and thanks to George's gift, those came here, and it's, I believe, the full run.
Right.
And over a long period of time, because it's a lot of material to get through, it was digitized and is now completely available and is searchable, and it is that is a, I hate to use a cliche, but it's really a quantum leap in terms of being able to understand not just what's being built in Philadelphia, but real estate transactions and information about architectural commissions and developments that are going on well beyond Philadelphia.
If I can add to that, the reason it existed was so that builders would know what architects had designed and could go bid on the project in their office.
So that's, and also other relevant information, like so-and-so has purchased X lot and is planning on developing it. And so it's real estate information.
So it's not a good weekly read.
No. It's not.
But it is a way that, we
although
can see.
Occasionally there's some really interesting editorials.
Oh, yeah.
But it really gives us a huge amount of undigested information.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, these things were like 16 pages, 8 pages each week.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah, easily.
What I would say about the Builder's Guide, and thank you to George Thomas for rescuing them and then for giving them to us in the year 2000. When we acquired those, they're extremely fragile.
Yes.
The pages are very thin.
It was that high acid 19th century
very
paper.
fragile.
Yeah.
And so and we had no means of scanning them at the time in the year 2000. But I knew that I wanted the source for the collection, even though the microfilm had been scraped. I guess that's a good one way to look at it.
Yeah.
Knowing that someday Yeah, it would be possible. Well, that someday arrived about 10 years ago,
Yeah.
primarily through the work of my former colleague, Mike Seneca, who personally scanned all 55,000 pages of the
God
Philadelphia
bless
Real
Mike.
Estate Record and Builder's Guide. And another shout out to my friend Walter Rice, who created the structure for PAB, who made it searchable, full text searchable.
Yeah.
So now you can actually use it, and we do, don't we?
Yes, we do, all the time. Yeah, it's,
And if I could just mention one other thing.
Yeah, of course,
in
please.
Well, in reference to George and getting back to Roger.
Yeah.
Roger was fond of saying the way to build a collection is not item by item, but to collect collectors.
yeah,
And George Thomas was one of those collectors. So not
Yep.
only did we get the Real Estate Record and Builder's Guide, but we got over 1,000 8x10 glass plate negatives from the Price and McClanahan firm. We got architectural drawings from Price and McClanahan. We got notebooks. We got sales receipts from furniture that the Rose Valley shops sent to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. And all of that came from George. We got George's own photographs, and he was certainly a talented photographer as well.
and what's his name, I can't remember, the commercial photographer, and it was from the 30s to the 50s.
Jacob Stellman.
Jacob
Yeah,
Stellman,
the Jacob
yes.
Stellman photograph collection is another. So George was a fantastic collector and then generous with the Athenaeum. Other major collectors that I just want to give it out a shout to: Samuel J. Dornsife of Williamsport, an enormous collection of Victorian period design materials. Irvin R. Glazer on Philadelphia theater buildings, thousands of photographs of those. Robert Raley, restoration and architect, a collection of over 1,200 rare architectural books from early America, Britain, and France. Robert Scaler's collection of postcards in Philadelphia, including 300 real photo postcards. And Hyman and Sandra Myers, who were often competing with George
Yes.
at Freeman's and at other auction houses, who literally gave us thousands and thousands of books as well as drawings and photographs. So by collecting collectors and grooming is such a terrible word these days, but by developing long-term relationships,
Cultivating
long-term relationships with knowledgeable donors who know what they're interested in and what they're looking for, and then also are aware of how do they preserve their collections best.
Yeah.
So that was
Yes.
one of the major things that I learned from Roger was collect collectors.
If I could turn to the backstory and the
Yeah.
kind of future story.
Yes, please, go ahead. And I think we'll conclude with that, and then we'll go on to
Okay, I'll be
the
brief.
question. No, you take your time.
Years ago, when studying architectural history, France was considered the center of modernity in the world in 19th century studies, and there was a book called something like, it was written by Brault. You remember this? Brault, and it was called Les Architectes par leurs œuvres.
Oh, yeah.
And the British version effectively was a book mentioned yesterday by Howard Colvin that was a biographical dictionary of British architects. I think the earliest version was from the 1950s. And that was like a version of the Oxford English Dictionary. He would have slips of paper that he then compiled into a publication. And in some ways, the red book, the top red book,
This one.
was effectively a version of that. But
Yeah.
as Emily says, the things that were missing from those was that scrupulous documentation for every fact. How do you know? And that was a core principle of this. And the other thing
And always a core principle of Rogers.
Right.
He
And
wanted
that wa-
citations.
And therefore,
Yeah.
a core principle of PAB,
Right.
when and because of the sheer quantity of information that's in PAB, it's never been completed, so to speak.
Right. And it won't be. Yeah.
No, not in our lifetimes, I don't think.
But, it takes, at one point there was a paid staff to compile this. And I think we're not really in that position right now to have a paid staff that works on amplifying, but I often use the metaphor of sharks swim or die. And to have an archive that's not continually growing is a static thing that becomes of less value. What the resources and staff and just effort may not be accomplished in-house can be facilitated. And those of us who teach, we're often effectively training students to do this kind of work. And to actually have professors, Philadelphia is a wonderfully rich place for people who are interested in architectural history. And it's a really sharing community. And right now for me, as I see it, the model is for us to teach them stuff and then entice them down here to get involved in projects. There is that excitement of discovery and adding to something that will persist. I'm sometimes thinking, though, of the mortality of memory. The human hard disk, unfortunately, expires. And to get things in a persistent place where they will be there for reference, a lot of the publications that cover things don't nearly go into the detail of the non-heroic figures, of the non-monumental buildings. And to get that kind of material into something like the PAB, I think our best hope for right now is to entice students to want to do this and then facilitate them. To make an entry into the PAB right now is a little bit onerous. Only Emily knows really how to do it.
Well, Bruce can too. Bruce knows too.
To get images into it, that's the other incredible richness of it, is there's a citation of a building, we can introduce a picture of the building, which really gives you the full reward for this sort of thing. But I think that we probably need to create an intermediate step, one where someone in Excel or in PowerPoint can compile the material, and then we can figure out how to inject it into the database fields. And I think that will allow a lot more people who know stuff to contribute it and to develop this in the future.
Yeah. It's the Wikipedia model, where outside people help to contribute and it has to be edited to put it in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the issue about archives is not just about looking back, but about looking forward too, just to kind of go to your point. I think those of you who saw the images of the Philadelphia Electric Company building, there was 3 images of that. There was a wonderful book that's in the library here called Palazzos of Power by
Aaron Wunsch.
Late Aaron Wunsch, who was wonderful. Use that book as a great resource as in addition to PAB to figure out about that electric company building. And bizarrely, that building is not on the historic register because there were 2 wonderful matching buildings there that matched the buildings on either side that were torn down to build that building in the 20s. So the notion of what's historic and what's not is always kind of interesting. But we used PAB and we used Aaron's book to renovate that building from the graffiti-covered state that it was to a new charter school for youth build that won a couple of AIA awards. That's specifically a school to teach kids how to do construction and renovation, and now we're talking about how they can get involved in restoration. And I love the kind of metaphor of how does a building that's built in the past that's not historically registered be restored itself to help teach kids how to do renovations and restorations in the future. So it's a great way to, archives are alive and allow us to build upon them to create wonderful things for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you're hinting at in this way, we've all kind of touched on a little bit, is that we can go beyond the biography model to think about other ways that the collections and the databases that we built and the online tools can enable understanding of the built environment beyond that what's associated with architectural, sort of the authorial architect. And I think that's certainly something that another way I hope we can expand PAB, which I may have said that a little bit earlier, but that we can make it a tool that can be flexible enough to accommodate that kind of information that you're talking about, that maybe we haven't even conceived of yet in terms of, in addition to the sort of the information that might be available in insurance surveys and just different ways of investigating, which I think depends on the input of scholars of the future and what questions they want to ask that we probably have not asked.
If I could just add one thing about the birth of PAB, and I call it the power of no. In the late 1990s, the greatest frustration with the biographical dictionary was that it was not indexed. And G.K. Hall, the publishers, wouldn't allow us to have an index because it would have required another 1,000 pages. And so, as Jeffrey mentioned, it's a frustrating book to use if you're looking beyond the name of the architect. So when the internet age was created, Roger and the staff here decided that the top priority in terms of grant funding was to get a grant to scan the biographical dictionary and have a fully searchable text in that. And so we applied for $75,000 to the William Penn Foundation, and they said no.
Right.
And Roger's head almost exploded. You know, this was the most important. This is the most important thing that we have on the burner, and they said no. And the program officers came back to us, said, no, we want you to include more than just what's at the Athenaeum. We want you to include images, and we want this to be easily accessible to the general public. And we said, well, you know, that's going to cost a lot more money. And they said,
okay.
Give us a proposal. So, long story short, we did a proof of concept project called the Philadelphia Roman Catholic Buildings Project,
Right.
where we just focused on Roman Catholic buildings because there were a lot of different building types and architects and holdings materials involved. Based on the success of that, William Penn Foundation ended up giving us $1.3 million. So it was the best no that we ever had. No, and so it's, you know, we could have just gone into a corner and twiddled our thumbs and said, gee, those people were so dumb for not funding that. Anyway, the power of no. No more time.
Actually, just to bring this back to Roger, the amazing thing is that it was Roger's vision and Sandra's vision, Bruce's vision, making this happen. And you know,
And
I
Julia's.
forget
And
what
Julia,
exactly the program to further understanding of the built environment, to support, to encourage scholarship, I think was the thing that is the title of the symposium. And Roger helped conceive these incredible tools for enhancing the possibilities of scholarship.
Yeah. Well, I think with that, we will turn it over to questions